Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion, and in the second hour, we're going to have a special guest talking about conference room audio. So stay tuned for that. And if you have questions, of course, you can ask them in Makana. You can vote on them. You can chat about them. You can do all those things. If you're not in Makana, of course, you can ask questions any time of the day. If you go to askofficehours.global, that's askofficehours.global. You can use that little QR code there. And ask those questions. You can do it 24/7. So if you see this later, you can ask the questions later, and then we'll answer them in the next day or two. So make sure that they're one question at a time. Make sure that they're well-formed. If we can't read them, we probably won't use them. But otherwise, go ahead and throw them into askofficehours.global. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Scott Mueller starts us off from Germantown, New York this morning. I'm editing a course that was recorded in Zoom, and to my horror, when the talent held up two fingers, virtual balloons floated up in my Zoom ISO recording. I had gestures disabled in the hosting account. How do I prevent this from ever happening again?
Go ahead, Nigel.
My guess is the other person on the other end was on a Mac and they hadn't turned those gestures off. So here's what you have to do. You have to start every call, every product when you get the person on the call. Do you have gestures off? Let me show you how to do this, or even warn them before. But the problem is not at your end. There's nothing you can do. They've got to turn them off at their end.
I feel like this is just such a non-Apple thing to do. It's just so frustrating. I mean, almost everybody seems to be more frustrated with this than less frustrated. It's a very odd thing for Apple to do, to turn this on and make it so hard to turn off. Go ahead, Jason.
On the remote side, there's very little you can do. Nigel and Alex nailed it.
Yeah, this is happening at the computer level, not at the Zoom level. So it's not Zoom's fault. It's Apple's fault, and it seems like a very unusual, forced error for them to kind of force this on, and it just seems to be very obscure. Like, it feels like at least the first time it happens, or when it happens, you should see a little note that says you can turn it off here, but they haven't done that. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, there is one way to prevent it from ever happening again, is use Windows.
It's so funny. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. In our fervor for video editing software, Blackmagic, DaVinci Resolve, and Apple Final Cut Pro, are we overlooking what may be the easiest to use software for the average person? Vegas Video. All three are $300 as a one-time fee.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Oh, no, they're not. It's much more complicated than that, sadly. Vegas Pro, the basic product, is about $150 and only runs on Windows. The Final Cut Pro, maybe $300, runs on Mac. And of course, as we know, the Blackmagic product runs across all those systems. Now, as to it being the easiest, I always think iMovie is the easiest. I did learn on Sony Vegas, but I think you have to decide whether you need it to run on multiple systems. And I would point out that the base Resolve is free.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Just like Nigel, I also started with Vegas, mostly because it came from Madison. But I've switched since then. It really depends on if you're going to be doing a lot of cross-platforming. Probably the easiest to edit in is technically on Mac is iMovie. And there are ways to convert it over, but when you convert from one platform to the other, there's always going to be a problem. Doesn't matter what you use for that conversion. So if you're sticking in a Windows and a Mac world, then DaVinci Resolve would probably be your best solution for that, or Adobe for that matter. But that's what you really need to look at if you're staying in an all Mac or all Mac infrastructure, or going to a Windows infrastructure, or back and forth.
Yeah, I think that the big thing you have to look at is where are you going to run out of runway? Like, when will it become something that's not powerful enough to do what you need to do? I think that Vegas might solve some of your problems today, but will it solve them tomorrow? And I think that, there's the big four, which is really, for people doing social, CapCut is something that's pretty popular, but the big four, of course, are Avid, Premiere, Resolve, and Final Cut. And I just wouldn't expend any time using anything other than one of those four, just because there's a little bit of a learning curve, but then you're in it. And again, the least expensive way to enter this is through Resolve. I think Final Cut is nice and fast. So if you really want to just get stuff done, and you can scale up quite a bit in Final Cut. But I think that Resolve is a free app, and it's cross-platform. So usually I've been kind of leaning towards, depending on what people are shooting with, is to try Resolve. If Resolve, it's free, if you like it, then stick with it. If it's a little too heavy for you and you're on a Mac, I'd go with Final Cut. It's a lot faster than everything else. If you're on a PC, you can look at Premiere. It's a little more expensive because you're going to pay every month for it. And Avid is really if you're just going to edit in Hollywood, as long as that lasts. So I don't think that Avid is really something I would expend energy on unless you really thought you were going to end up working on a big film. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I think for the average person as well, we shouldn't discount iMovie. It can't do its capabilities are very limited, and it's really directed towards your family videos, your non-professional use, I guess you could say. But for the average person, that's all they need.
Yeah, I think that the hard part is that I feel like it isn't as smooth as Apple would like to make it seem to go from iMovie to Final Cut. So if you get into iMovie, you're going to expend a bunch of energy figuring out how to do it there, and then you're going to spend more energy trying to you're going to hit a ceiling pretty fast in iMovie. Mickey's completely right that if you are just hacking something together and that's all you're ever going to do, then iMovie's free. It's available. It is actually the most popular video editor in the world. So anyway, maybe CapCut might be passing it now, but it's free and it ships on every Mac and it's on iPad or I think it's on iPhone as well. And so there's a lot you can do with it. I know that some creators were using that. I think a lot of creators that I talked to were using iMovie or the built-in TikTok until CapCut came out and moved on. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Francis Frey in Cambridge, Massachusetts. When I use transcript editing services like Riverside or Descript, the audio drifts after about 20 minutes of 4K videos. Do you have a sense of what might be going on, and which service would you recommend? Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I've done some Riverside 4K recordings, and they're in sync. I'm wondering if the setting right here that says 44.1 versus 48K might be your issue is the audio sample right here where you can choose, and they say we suggest 44.1 for recording audio only and 48 kilohertz when recording video and audio. So I'm wondering if that's what you did is might have had it at 44.1 then dropped it into a 48K timeline and then that drift would occur. So that's probably what it is. But Riverside itself is in sync.
My experience has been usually if you do a 44.1 and drop it into a 48, everybody sounds a lot lower than they normally do, because it's slowing them down just by a little bit. Go ahead, Bill.
Whenever anybody says drift of sync in video and audio, I go exactly where Guy's mind went. Sample rate mismatch between the source footage and your timeline. So look there first.
It could be also that you have a timeline that is 29.97 and you're doing a 30, you recorded at 30. So the frame rate is also an issue. That little bit of frame rate you'll lose. It'll be about a frame a second, but it's about a second every minute or something like that. It would line up dropping a 30 into 29.97 and having it not correct for that would line up with what you're having there. So it could be you make sure that your frame rate is identical in both areas, or it could fall out. Next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles is up next. Any opinions on the DJI Osmo Pocket 3 as a run-and-gun travel camera? How's the audio and video quality?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I was I saw a lot of it at CES and I got to play with it a little bit. I have the Pocket 1 and the Pocket 2, and I love those. The biggest thing that the Pocket 3 did not have that I still like the Pocket 2 was that extension handle, because if you have to hold it like this or you have to figure out some sort of cage to put around that that camera, it gets a little bit tough. There's a lot of features, a lot of great features, especially if you're going vertical on some of your videos. You just basically turn the screen and there you got a vertical video. So that's a nice feature there. The audio, it pairs with the DJI audio mic, so you can actually have the dual lav if you want to use 2.4 gigahertz wireless. It'll also have a 3.5 adapter, so you can plug it into something else like anything that doesn't have a USB audio to it, possibly. And then it's got a lot of great effects, little glamour shot effects and things like that, if that interests you. So you'll be able to do a great job on it, but the biggest thing is just holding that camera and trying to figure out how to place it. Those are the two bigger problems.
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, I got one last December. And it's a nice little camera. Definitely not something that it might be good enough for like a vlog or something, but not. It's certainly not what I would consider as broadcast quality. Its image is you can tell there's a lot of post processing happening within the camera itself. Like there's a lot of smoothing and noise reduction, so it's not a clear you're not getting exactly what the sensor is putting out. Um, it's if you use the normal LUT built into the camera, I find that it is very oversaturated and very contrasty, not natural looking. So it depends on what kind of look you're going for. And I experienced the same when I record D-Log M within the camera, and I applied the D-Log M to 709 LUT in post. Their transform is it's pushed to like extremely vivid, high contrast, high saturation, which I personally don't like. So but what I end up doing is I use the D-Log M to 709 LUT and just place it at 50 or 70% on the node within Resolve, so that I'm not getting the full effect of the very high contrast, high saturation image. But it's a fun little camera, like good for travel videos and such. But I wouldn't go for it for uh, like as a broadcast solution or a filmmaking solution.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, I wouldn't use it for any kind of live stream, which I don't even think you can. I have a Pocket One, and the great thing about the Osmo Pockets is they're so low key. Unless you glom a bunch of stuff onto them, you can put it in flashlight mode, which is where you point it straight down, and it tilts the gimbal up so it's looking straight forward. And people don't even realize you've got a camera. So if you're in a politically strange situation in a country where they may frown on people going around taking a lot of pictures at the embassy or something, you can clandestinely capture a lot of candid photos and candid video with it. So it's good for that because it's so small. You can slip it in your pocket. You're not obvious. You look just like a tourist. But like Mickey says, it's not broadcast quality, but it's certainly good enough. The 4K version is certainly good enough for your home big screen.
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, I failed to mention something about the audio quality, just because Robert is asking about it. It sounds like a camera mic. It does have some built-in noise suppression processor in it, but you can hear it do its work.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. Would the DJI Mini 4 Pro be a solid choice for a first drone? And he's got a link to it there.
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, I would say no. Like as a first drone, I'd probably or first multicopter, quadcopter. I'd probably look for a secondhand like Phantom 1 or Phantom 2, or even like a secondhand their smaller version, and learn on that. And I'd say that also that like the less automated the support in there, like all the obstacle avoidance, the better training you would get as a multicopter pilot, as opposed to like initially relying on them from the get-go. Learn how to fully operate it yourself before relying on these other subsystems.
Good, Bill.
I'm 100% behind Mickey's thought here. It seems to me that the drone pilots that I talked to who have been really gotten good at it, they started on one that had less automation, and they were kind of learned the physicality of being able to control and watch a drone. They are so automated now that they are much easier to have success with flying. But I wonder if you get in trouble nowadays, and some of them have so much obstacle avoidance and stuff like that it's harder to get in trouble. But boy, those original skills that I've seen, the really good drone pilots really learn to fly it like they learn to fly a plane, and most people don't learn on a 747 or a big automated plane. They learn in something smaller, build their skills, and then they move up. So that would be kind of my approach if I wanted to get into drones heavily.
Go, Jason.
Yeah, learn your sticks and then deal with other things.
Courtney.
Well, I kind of disagree. As a first, the Mini 4 is great for a couple of reasons. One is you don't have to register it. You don't have to have a pilot's license because it's under 240 grams. All the other choices mentioned so far with no automation, and they're heavier drones. You have to fly them these days. You have to have a transponder attached to them. so that they give you GPS coordinates and identification transponder put onto them, which older drones don't have. And because it has anti-collision, it's easier to ease your way in. Now, if you want to learn how to crash a drone, get one that doesn't have any of the avoidance, the obstacle avoidance built in. The Mini 4 has, obstacle avoidance up, down, left, and right, and back, forward, and backwards. And so it will keep you from running into the wall if you make a stupid mistake and have the joystick turned around the wrong way. So if you you get a lot more learning done on one that has the obstacle avoidance than you do with one that will run into a tree almost instantly and crash, and then you'll be out of business.
Go ahead, Mickey.
And also probably consider also those toy multicopters, like those that you can get for $20 or $30 US. Those would that have a body built out of foam. Those are good tools to start learning.
Yeah, the funny thing about those is that the larger the drone gets, the easier it is to fly because it's got a lot more weight to it. So when you get really good at the little ones, and you can get these little ones for $20, as Mickey said, if that becomes something that's second nature for you, then it feels like you're driving this big tank after that, and the trim feels so much more comfortable on a larger drone when you're used to the little ones. You just crash all the time. Like they're so twitchy, but you get good at those, and I knew someone that didn't do anything other than those little ones, and when I handed them the drone to this was a Mavic, they just took it right off. They took them a second to figure out what the controls were, and then after that they were really on it and they flew better than most drone pilots because they had been playing with all these little ones for a long time. They weren't quite the $20 ones; they're like $50 ones. But I would, playing with the idea of getting through some of those trouble. I wrecked a couple drones, and I went through a couple $1,000s worth of drones before I had one that just took off and never came back. That was a little bit of a bug, and then I had another one that I just put into the ground somehow. I'm not sure exactly how that happened. And then another one that I tried to put a theta on, and it threw off its weight, spun around and hit the ground. So those are the kind of things that you have to get used to if you start trying to do anything interesting with them. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, and like my dad, who is an RC vehicle enthusiast, he has like dozens of like Tamiya, like small scale trucks. He was playing with those small like $20 drones for like 4, 5, 6 years, and then when was that? I think like after 4 or 5, 6 years, I got him. I think it was a Phantom 3 or a Phantom 4. It's like, this is so easy to fly.
Yeah, exactly. It gets a lot easier after that. Next question.
Next one comes from Guy Cochran in Seattle. So we're throwing a Cochran to Cochran. Are there any NAB pre-announcements coming up?
He throws. He's going down the field. He passes the defender, and he catches. Guy.
All right. So far, we all are seeing this Black Magic 2 days, 1 hour. So I think that's one of the bigger ones that
They seem optimistic. they got quite a countdown there. Anything else, Guy?
Another one that I'm seeing is Adamus. Yesterday, it was 3 days to launch. Ninja's new best friend in your pocket. So we'll see what that is.
Interesting.
Yesterday, we did see these inflatable lights from Aperture that got announced, and there's a new Sidus Link Pro app that came out. So that's a couple that have already done some pre-announcements. I'm wondering if anybody else has heard anything more. I saw something from PTZ Optics. Not sure if they've actually announced anything yet, though.
Go, Bill.
I'm just reflecting what Alex was talking about. This has been a different year. We've seen these kind of big pre-launch things like Frames yesterday, where they're doing these big video announcements ahead of time. And it looks like the old cycle of everybody holds things to get ready for NAB and then tries to compete in this information space. I must have 40 or 50 announcements in my inbox from various companies talking about what they're doing. Now, all of these are not going to be transformational, but there is certainly a lot of new stuff that's been under development for a year, 2 years, 4 years, however long, that's going to break right before NAB because they know the eyes of the world are on that. So we're flooded with what's coming up.
Go, Jeffrey.
First of all, I had to make sure that I'm not going to disclose anything that's still under NDA. But Frame.io announced yesterday their new version 4, which was a complete revamp of their system, which is great. Canon's coming out with a new lens, the CJ27EX7.3B, which is a 2/3 inch portable lens with 27-inch optical zoom. What Guy was talking about, PTZ Optics is coming out with this Hive software, and the idea is for remote control, especially of PTZ cameras. NDI6 we heard of already. Verizon has got some 5G stuff. They're doing the 5G live broadcast, their private networks, and their edge editor. And they're already working with the NHL with these products. DJI has it's their Ronin lines, the 10-year anniversary. So they got the RS4, the RS4 Pro, and the Focus Pro, which they're going to be showing. Hollyland's got some new stuff, and Chiron's going to focus on graphics, and then Telestream has got a new live product suite, which I don't know too much about, but that's going to be a pretty interesting thing, and I'm definitely going to check out their booth and see what their plans are for the next 5 years, because I don't know what it is right now.
Good, Bill.
When Jeffrey mentioned Frame, it just reminded me of how much things have changed over the course of the years. It was really cool. Emery did a fabulous job yesterday in the big video release ahead of time. But he noted at the end that a lot of the product isn't shipping now. Some things will be. You'll be able to see it at NAB. But this has been a trend for a long time, that sometimes you actually see the product that you can buy it at NAB when it's released. But there's also a lot of stuff that this part of it will have ready at beginning. But then they noted that there are professional levels that will be coming later in the year coming up. So a rolling release of the actual gear over the course of the next year or so is pretty typical for these kind of announcements. But you're going to be hearing about a lot of things because of the media space right now.
Good guy.
And Alex, how are we going to get people, let's say Canon has that new lens and they're cool with coming over to our booth to talk to us. What's the process there to get somebody from one booth and drag them over to ours?
The best thing for us to do right now, so I will say that we are booked. I think there's one space open left. So we booked. We're booked at the top. So we booked the booth at the top of the hour, and we booked a live view hit from the bottom of the hour. So those are they're two different kind of. If we're going to someone's booth, we are not really interacting with the panel as much. But we'll still take questions through Makana. If we go to the booth and then talking to the panel, to do that. So it's two different kinds of video that's there. But yeah, I think we have one spot open, but it filled up much faster than we even were kind of holding back because we were trying to make sure partners were all included and everything else. So we're full when it comes to those two things. Now, what we haven't scheduled is all of the wireless hits that we're hoping to do in the central hall. Now, this is a kind of experimental, but we have a very powerful Vislink two-way system. So assuming that we've never done this before, no one's done it, and there's a lot of metal, so we're not sure how far it'll go, but we're going to find out. In those areas, and I think Canon is I think they're in the central hall. So I think we can theoretically, I don't know exactly. Well, I can find out. Yeah.
Canon's booth used to be in the south hall by the big pillars in the middle.
They're in the central hall, and and they are not horribly far away from us. So they're before we get to the stairs. They're right in front of where the stairs are. They go up in the central hall. So theoretically, if the transmitters work well, we should be able to go over to Canon, and those are going to be ad hoc, and we have 2 of those per hour. So we'll have 6 of those a day. So we've got about 20 that are 2022 hits that we can do that are a little bit more like, let's figure out, we're going to schedule Sundays this week before we get there. But outside of that, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're looking around. We're looking for cool things in the central hall. Our goal, of course, is that if this is successful, our goal will be to be able to do this in every hall, like where we have an interactive two-way and we have wireless systems on, like low latency wireless everywhere. But right now we're doing it. We're testing it in the central hall because it has the most eye candy and the least amount of infrastructure. So the south hall has a lot of eye candy, but a lot of it's more software based and less like things you feel like you'd want to look at and play with and touch. So that's why we're leaning into the central hall is the most camera friendly hall. And so that's why we're there. But I think that so that. Definitely let us know what people are interested in, and we'll kind of go through there. But obviously the panelists can tell us what they want to go, what they want us to see. Canon is definitely high on the list. Obviously Sony's on the other side. We think we can get to Sony. Sony's a little bit of a hard throw. So that might be a live view hit. But yeah, we'll be working on it. But it should be interesting. It's a very aggressive coverage that we're doing. So hopefully folks can watch it, and hopefully most of it will work. But we've spent a lot of work on it, so it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, I've been using 2 internal effects engines in the Yamaha DM3 mixer from my DAW. I've noticed that sometimes the signal comes out louder than it came in. How do you properly gain stage hardware effects units in a DAW-centric world?
Mickey?
Yeah, have a tone generator at the start of your effects loop and run that tone. Pick a reference level. What's popular is minus 20 dBFS. Also, in some countries, what's popular is minus 18 dBFS. Run that through the entire effects loop without the effects engaged, and make sure that every step of the chain is calibrated so that it reads that exact same level. So you want the unity all throughout the effects loop, going back into the DAW. That way you know that there is no change in gain staging all the way through the pipeline, and the only thing that affects the level or the output is that effects processor.
Next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama. I'm trying to recreate stinger transitions as they are done on the NFL or NC2A broadcasts. Any suggestions where to get started with ideas and examples? And he's looking for a library for inspiration.
Yeah, I'd say so. And NCAA and the NFL are two of definitely the high points. And I would say the NFL is probably one of the best at doing those transitions. And specifically, I would look at NBC and CBS. Both do pretty good job, and Fox. And I guess ABC does pretty good. ABC doesn't seem to invest quite as much in what they're doing there. But but all of those are going to be at a very, very high level, and it's the number one reason I have YouTube TV. So YouTube TV allows me to go look at stuff. It's gotten harder and harder and harder to pull video out of it. I think both Apple and YouTube make it hard, are improving their ability to stop you from recording anything that you see. So that's become a little bit more difficult, but not impossible. But what I do is I set it to auto record for everything. I know that in Panama you may not be able to do this, but I set it to auto record everything all the time, and then I go back and I'm looking at stingers. Even local stations will have good stingers that are there. But the best thing to do is to try to reproduce them pixel by pixel. That's the goal, is really try to go in there and that's how I got into doing broadcast graphics. Was I just looked at other people's broadcast graphics, I recorded them on a VHS tape or whatever. And then I just tried to do it exactly the way they did it. Oftentimes I couldn't even do it that way because I was an intern trying to learn how to do this, and they had a $50,000 budget for that stinger. So it was a different game, but it really helped me understand how those things are constructed. I mean, the main thing is that you're going in and out. It's going to happen very quickly, usually 15 to 30 frames, and you just need one frame in the middle that's completely opaque, and that's where you're going to do your cut. Go ahead, Bill.
And some of the packages, in fact, tomorrow's show, we're having our friends from FX Factory come in. They will have packages that include pre-built. Motion VFX is another company on the Mac side, because that's what I normally world in. And you will see versions that they have created in products like Motion or After Effects on the PC side that have pre-built things that look very much like this. It's great to start with buying one of those plugins, putting it in, and if you have access to it through your machine, you can kind of start deconstructing the techniques that they use in those programs to create the flying elements. And in fact, you can often unpack them, change colors, change logos and things like that, and repurpose something that's pre-built like that for your own purposes. So it's a good educational step along the way of becoming better at motion graphics.
Go ahead, Courtney.
And of course, you have to have a switcher that supports it, or have to build a macro that will switch at exactly the right one frame where it has to switch from one source to another source. And one thing we can look forward to at NAB is maybe they will ungray out the stinger tab in the ATEM control software, so we can actually use it sometime. I'll have to add some more memory to that sheet.
Dreamer. No, next question.
Roscoe Jones is up next from Madison, Indiana. Can you explain why I'd use SRT over NDI or vice versa?
Good guy.
Yeah, SRT you would use as a transport to get from out in the field in, mostly you're seeing a lightweight bandwidth like 8 megabit for SRT versus 120 megabit for NDI. So right there, you start to see some of the differences. And then there's a latency difference. So we're transmitting at about a 2-second latency between caller and listener. So you get this long latency, but you get a nice, clean, pristine image. NDI, you can measure it within milliseconds, so less than a frame. You can get sub frame down to the line. So in editing or in live, NDI as full bandwidth has much richer, deeper color than you can get with SRT. So mostly we're using SRT internally to throw stuff around, SRT out in what we call the WAN versus the LAN. So two different worlds really, but you can use NDI with bridge and compress it down into these lower flavors like H.264 and H.265 and transport it. And then you start to get into some of these reasons why you want to open up ports and not open up ports. And you could use things like SRT mini server to get around these things and do what's called a turn server. So you can get behind corporate firewalls easier. So it just depends on what you're trying to do. But SRT is also a lot of hardware that's being used in addition to software to get you from place to place. So we're seeing $100 encoders all the way up to Makito $10,000 encoders that will allow 4 SRTs to shoot up. And then you can get into 10-bit color as well as not just 8-bit like you could with some of the cheaper encoders out there. So hopefully that's enough to get you going, Roscoe.
Yeah, and SRT is just a protocol, so you can package a lot of video into it. It's just a matter of what you can get on either side. So your video quality isn't too limited by the actual SRT protocol, but it's limited by what you package into it. So you can definitely put very, very high quality up there, but the latency is always going to be a little bit higher because it's more reliable. Next question.
Next question comes from Zach Stallsmith in Chautauqua, New York. For editing purposes, would it be better to pipe program audio into a pan-tilt zoom camera or just capture audio and video separately?
Jeffrey?
For editing purposes, always separate. Especially nowadays, it's a lot easier to do. I had a review of the wireless dual lav where it records on the lav 2.4 gigahertz, and even that, which doesn't have time code attached to it, was super easy to put into an editor and line it up properly. I would highly suggest that you do have something on the camera so you can match up audio as best as possible. But the biggest problem with a lot of PTZ cameras, especially older PTZ cameras, is what's going to be their audio chip inside, what's going to be the bit rate, because their focus is on video. It's not as much on audio. So I have some PTZ cameras that are 16-bit audio. I would never use it for that. So just keep that in mind. And I'll definitely throw the depends flag on this whole thing for how you're using it.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, certainly I would rely on an audio recorder to do the audio recording, multi-track. I'm assuming this is an event. As Jeffrey mentioned, cameras aren't really built out with the circuitry to prioritize high quality recording of audio. So something that's dedicated to the task would deliver better quality, but it would be good to send a reference mix over to the camera so that for rushes or dailies or even just playing back the video for review, you have something to listen to. But for what is used in the actual cut, use the recording that's done on the proper audio recorder.
Good, Bill.
What everybody else has been saying, scratch track on the camera, fabulous. Please do it if you can, because for the editor, it makes it so much easier. Even if it's the worst quality sound, if you can just tell somebody's on camera, they speak, and if you can see any difference in the waveform and know that's the moment they speak, that is a sync point for you in a run-and-gun situation or a PTZ camera. Even if you have a terrible mic on it, please turn it on, and if you have a little card in the PTZ, please put it in and allow that audio to be useful for the editor if they need it. But 100% behind the idea of never, ever, ever use that as your program audio. That is purely for editorial sync in the suite.
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, and for the audio recording, if you can multi-track, not only record the the mix, but also record the ISO so that you have more flexibility in post, as opposed to relying on the recording on a camera, which would most likely just be a mix down of what's all the sources on stage.
By the way, if you have questions, you can go ahead and throw those questions in. If you're in Makana, of course, you can ask the questions. You can vote on them. You can talk to each other about them. If you are not in Makana, of course, you can use askofficehours.global. That's Ask Office Hours Global. You can ask that 24/7. So you can don't ask questions for this morning for that time, but you can ask them 24/7, and we'll get them into the next show. All right, next question.
Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand's up next. I rebuilt my MacBook Pro, previous Office Hours PSA. I noticed I had a lot of software that I hadn't gotten around to installing, courtesy of hardware I'd bought and their associated deals. One was the Plugin Alliance. Anyone use their offerings? And he's got a link to Plugin Alliance.
Good, Jason.
I have. It's been a while. One important thing to know about hardware is that you really shouldn't be installing things that you're not using. And, the Plugin Alliance really is just an alliance. They have offerings, that aren't directly part of them. I'm seeing stuff from Isotope. Isotope doesn't have anything to do with them directly. So don't install it if you don't need it. But yeah, I've used it, and it's been a little while.
Good, Bill.
In the big world of plugins out there, just know that the quality is all over the map. You have plugins out there that are as good as commercial programs, and you have plugins that a beginner wrote, and often they do not write them particularly well. I think a lot of us who've been around computing for a long time have had experience of loading a plugin and having all sorts of system problems because its code just wasn't particularly well done. So it's just a buyer beware. I mean, I tend, and I think most of the people I know who make money with their systems tend to have trusted vendors, and we know that those vendors carefully look at the code of everybody working for them that's coming into the system and make sure that there's no traps or dead ends or things like that where you load something and you affect it, and the next thing you know, you've got to quit your system to get out of it. Those are no fun at all. So just be a little wary if you're out into the big world of open source plugins or inits or little things like that.
Good, Marty.
Yeah, I actually have a lot of plugins from the Plugin Alliance, and I found them, for the most part, to be quite good. And this is something that wasn't widely announced, but apparently Isotope is now may have been taken over by the Plugin Alliance or exclusively marketed by Plugin Alliance, so you can get a lot of their stuff there. But yeah, I found them. They have certain brands, certain software brands that are really quite good. They some of the modeling that they do is quite astonishing. They will model components down to the resistor level of old hardware pieces, so that if you put them on different tracks in the DAW, they will sound slightly different, just like real hardware would. So I would take a good look at them. I found some really good deals, very reasonably priced, and some really high quality stuff.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, Google has created its own ARM-based CPU to run Google services. Thoughts? And he's got a link there to The Verge.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, so while we're used to hearing about billions of iOS devices and maybe even a couple of 100 million PCs or clients, it's important to understand the server market is a lot smaller. It's hard to get exact numbers because they don't share them, and for a reason I'll give in a second, but let's assume it's between 10 and 15 million units a year of servers. Google on their own probably buys 10% of those. So they're probably buying between 1.5 or, million units around that area. So they are a massive customer. Now, typically what they're buying is either Intel or AMD type units, which are full of stuff they don't need. And at this scale, they are burning power and energy and effort running applications and capabilities in the chips that they wish they could probably turn them off. So what they're fundamentally doing is building ARM chips that turn all that stuff off, or just doesn't have that stuff, so they can be much more focused on the specific work they're going to do. And so that's sort of what you're seeing. And I think I wouldn't confuse that with the conversation I know we had on Office Hours yesterday, or some people did, I was in an airplane at the time, about Snapdragons running Windows. And by the way, on that question, the thing I was shouting at the plane, which annoyed the person next to me, is, yes, they can run, just as fast as an M3, but doing what? And what we sometimes forget, that servers are much more specialist products, and edge servers and specific client accelerators that do very specific work are even more specialist. So I think you're seeing some of that. I wouldn't assume they're trying to take Intel out.
I'm just imagining Nigel sitting on a plane going, doing what? Doing what? Doing what? Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Doing what? So it's called Axion, is the ARM chip that they're coming out with, and it's exactly what Nigel was talking about. It's paring it down to something, because there's to something super easy to and bloat free to use, because we're going to be seeing a lot of GPU versus CPU. We're going to be seeing a lot of how storage works. I just posted an article about speed and IOPS and all that other stuff for putting together an enterprise AI system in the data center. So these are, and of course these are for the data center, because we're also going to see laptop level. Lenovo just came out with a laptop that really works with ChatGPT. Well, I saw that a few weeks ago. We're going to see a lot of this back and forth, and how companies, especially internal companies, can build their own AI systems. So when their employees start asking questions, they're going to get the answers that they need, as opposed to going out to the internet to ask those same questions.
Good. Courtney?
Yeah, a lot of companies are creating these new custom chips specifically for AI, because AI doesn't require floating point math. It just is matrix multiplication, addition, subtraction. So it's pretty easy, even in 2-bit and 4-bit math, because it has to be high speed, and they're just creating, doing evaluations of tokens and doing statistics, basically. They're called tensor processing units. I think Google's calling them that. But they're special CPUs designed with those cores that can be used in processing large language models to do the training on them. IBM has a new one out called North Pole. They're still testing it. It's coming out of the research labs. That is, if I'm reading right here, 25 times more energy efficient than the other chips in the process. So it's currently at a 10 nanometer, and they're working on a 2 nanometer version. So 10 nanometers, they can run it with just a regular heatsink, unlike the NVIDIAs that have to have huge cooling to keep them cool. A lot of energy required to keep these units cool because of all the matrix math that's going on in there to train these models. And this new North Pole has memory and the TPU chip, basically like the CPU, all on the same die. So there's 256, I think, on a single chip cores that are the TPU processors. That's what they're working on now, but they're planning a 4 nanometer version now. So I'd watch that one too. So they're going to sell that into the server market.
Go, Nigel.
And don't forget, there are only a small number of people who can actually fab these things. So you've got, obviously, Intel can fab, TSMC can fab, Global Foundries can fab, Samsung can fab. And within that, there are all sorts of alliances. So if you buy that chip from IBM, and then you go to look at what Samsung's doing or Global Foundries doing, they're probably all using the same fabrication processes. So you're going to see a huge amount of crossover between all of these processes and their capabilities, because they're all built on the same chemistry.
One of the things I thought was interesting is that, it's C plant. This is the in Los Alamos. they have I don't know what they're doing now, but for quite some time they learned to go to much cheaper processors that they could replace easily. So they instead of doing building these really, I think you're thinking about, wow, they're going to have really powerful processors, and when NVIDIA does it for AI and so on and so forth, there's a high density, high powered system. But a lot of times it's easier to build lots of little systems that you can just throw away. So you just, when they go bad, you throw them away, and they're much smaller processors. They're much more disposable. I think that the person I knew at C-Plant, I think, said that they replaced them they replaced 5 to 6 a day. There was thousands of them there, and they just pull it out, and well, that one's done. And it was all part of a big Borg of computers. And so I think that, and I've talked to folks at some other companies that have done that, and they just said, that's a lot easier. And so that leans into the ARM-based processing in a way that you wouldn't, that you would not have to worry about as much. Next question.
Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas, with South by Southwest having a YouTube channel with every session in music, film, and interactive, organized and well-curated playlists. Why would you ever need to buy a $3,000 pass?
Go, Jeffrey.
Out of all the questions that Paul would ask, I never thought that this would be one of them. It's basically about interactive. Last time, during COVID, what we did was we watched films through their app, and it was great. You got to see the movies that you wanted to see, but you didn't get the interaction. You didn't get the to see what you would say to might not be something that everybody else says to. And I think that bases on when you because when you go to on certain movies, you're actually rating the movies as you go. So you miss out on all of that, the interaction, meeting people on the streets, especially multiple stars, celebrities I've met on the streets of South by Southwest and had a good conversation with them, because it feels it didn't feel like a event with photographers and anything like that. So you get a lot of good interaction with that. And the biggest thing is I just don't want to mosh in my living room. I might just break my TV.
Good, Bill.
I don't think a lot of individuals springs, maybe somebody who's really well-heeled will, but in most cases, and I'm thinking back to all the conventions that I've gone to, South by Southwest has been a little bit kind of alt for most of its early days, but now it's a huge marketplace. So corporations often have continuing education money, and they will take the people who are involved in these kind of things. They will buy them the hotel, buy them the full pass, and they expect them to go and learn techniques that are going to benefit the corporation after that. So if your corporation is footing the bill for $5,000 or $6,000 for your South by Southwest experience, this is kind of a no-brainer in those circumstances.
Go, Courtney.
Yeah, it's for the deal makers, really. It's where the deals are made. The people are making contact. There used to be a thing called AFM. It may still be going on. It used to happen here in Los Angeles or in New York, which is American Film Market, where all these independents would bring their new films and show them to the distributors to try and sign them up to get a deal for distribution. The same thing is true, I think, at South by Southwest, because there's a lot of new musicians, bands, software manufacturers, and filmmakers and TV shows that are pitching shows, and they're looking for a distributor. They're looking to make a deal, and you can't do that over YouTube. So you got to rub elbows. You got to take people out to a few drinks at the local 6th Street bar and convince them that your product is better than anybody else's.
I'm not certain, but I think they may be actually sold out. So I don't know if I don't think it's hurting them too much. So I don't think you can actually buy tickets. I think one of the reasons they've been comfortable with doing this is because they're at capacity, for what they're doing right now. And I don't think they can leave Austin to go somewhere bigger. That would not work. So I think that making it more available, we have not found that streaming has a negative impact on, and this is why you're seeing more and more people streaming, because the data is starting to roll out that it actually increases the number of people that want to go, because they feel like they get an experience of it, but they know that it's less than what it would be like to be there. So we just really haven't found that streaming conferences has reduced the urge for people to go to the conference. It makes it's generally had a positive effect on attendance, because they go, oh, well, someday I'm actually going to go, and then they end up going. And there's definitely a value in being there and being with other people. I have to admit that I don't think that the conferences, I think that the conferences are fine, most of the roundtables, I feel like, well, you could do that anywhere over Zoom, and you don't, so when you think of like conferences and roundtables, I kind of go, well, I don't know if I'd really want to, and I have to admit, I've been going to conferences for 30 years now or 35 years, and I don't go to any of the conferences. Like I go to the expos, I go to the events, I go to things that I'm hanging out, I'm having lots of lunches and dinners. And I don't usually sit in most of I don't find them to be that compelling, to be honest. So I think they have a bunch of sessions. You can stream all the sessions you want. The value of South by Southwest is happening in the halls. It's happening in the bars. It's happening in the, expo. That's where the value is. And so streaming the conference is kind of, it doesn't really, I don't think it would affect anything because it's not really what's valuable there. Or any conference. Next question.
Peter Moore, Auckland, New Zealand. Apologies for being away for a bit. When is the next DMX tech update from Tlaloc Lopez Waterman happening? And if there's been an episode on that, please let me know.
Good guy.
Yeah, I reached out to Tlaloc. He hasn't replied back, which means he's probably busy. And that's the problem with guys that are doing theater and out doing real work. They sometimes get wrapped up. But I will say that we should put a request in for a second hour on this topic and invite Mitch Gross, who is an industry veteran. He now works for Aperture, and Aperture just released the Sidus Pro app, which has some DMX control and cues, which is really cool. So you can actually record the cues and then play them. So I was playing with it yesterday. It's very fascinating. So if you can vote that up, put it in the second hour request, and let's get it going, because I think Mitch will come on. He's from Panasonic, Able Cinetech. He is a wealth of knowledge, and I think he would be a great candidate if Tlaloc is too busy.
That's great. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. How was your Eclipse experience? This was ours in Hot Springs, Arkansas. He has a link there.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I stayed in office hours, and that was my best Eclipse experience. In fact, we saw Paul on there streaming. Here's a still from what they had a tracking camera that tracked the sun, but unfortunately the only way you could see the output of it is by shooting a person's phone, and it had all those overlays over the top of it. That's the moment of totality. And they did a time lapse of it, and I thought they should probably do a slow-mo instead of time lapse, because time lapse just makes that 4 minutes go by, and it's not something you want to see. But hey, he's got in that video, he's got a lot of stuff he shot with his phone during the eclipse, so that you see the surrounding people and them having a good time there. As it got dark, you could actually see the stars surrounding the sun in the wide shot. They are at least a few planets, maybe Venus. But it was an interesting show in after hours, and we talked to Marty, who's here on the panel today, and watched his live stream from outside his hotel in Colleen. So it was kind of interesting in after hours. Of course, we had the regular office hours on the big screen there, watching our experts comment on them. As for my personal experience, I went outside and I had some triple over Mylar, which is basically what they use for the glasses, aluminized Mylar, and got to look at the 30% coverage that we had here in Los Angeles.
Go, Jason.
Max apogee in Albuquerque was 78%, and of course I walked out and took a look at it with the glasses. But most of my experience was Alex and Bill and the office hours coverage, which I think was very well executed. That expert you had on from Perth was pretty good.
Matt Woods, nice guy.
Matt Woods was great.
He was fabulous. Well, I was just going to mention, and we're going to be talking about this tomorrow, or day after tomorrow on Fridays. We're going to break down some of the back end stuff of what happened, what went well, and what didn't. But I was fascinated the whole time. Matt was great to have explain a lot of the celestial mechanics of what was going on, and I thought we just had a good time. I mean, I thought it was fabulous. Everybody had a little different perspective, and the 2 hours, you're on camera kind of. The 2 hours seemed to me to last about 30 minutes. It was just because I was listening to people who really knew what they were talking about, and it was just fun to do.
Yeah, it was. The hardest part with all of these is that you get to do it once, and all the things are different, and the weather's changing, and it's like one of the harder things to cover, just because you have so many moving parts. So, next question.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles says, I have a Novation Launch Control XL controlling a MixPre 6. It has a mute button. Should I still get a hardware mute device for use in Zoom?
Go ahead, Mickey.
I'd say it depends on if you use noise assist, do know that the noise assist processor comes after the mute section in the block diagram. So if you hit mute in the mix pre, it will cut off the signal going into the noise assist processor. And since the noise assist processor is always in learn mode, when you cut off the signal going to it, it loses its noise profile. This is different compared to a higher end noise suppression hardware, wherein you can lock in the noise profile and take it off of learn mode. So if you rely on noise assist, I would not hit mute on the mix pre, but alternatively, you can just fade the channel down using your controller.
Go ahead, Bill.
My 2 cents, Gordon, is if you're just on occasionally, it's not that big a deal. If you're on like some of us are, and, I'm sitting here for hours a day and have dozens and dozens of questions where I have to mute and unmute, the physical button under your finger is worth its weight in platinum to me. So it just depends on your use case.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, and I have to say that with Zoom, I've been using Command-Shift-A, just the standard keyboard shortcut, since I started using Zoom, and it's been quite reliable for me.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, don't forget, if you don't know this, go into Zoom, global settings, set up a key for the global settings on a Mac. On a large keyboard, I use the F19. That's the simplest way. But I also have a hardware mute because there's just sometimes I physically really need to know that the mic is off. And I can just reach and bang that. But otherwise, I just use the keyboard.
Yeah, I have to admit, one of the things I like about the hardware mute that I have a Studio Technologies 205, is the light. So there's a hardware and there's a light, and I can glance down and go, is my mic on? Is it off? So I have this kind of outside of the whole system. And it also means that, I have to join a lot of meetings in a lot of different environments. So Zoom is one environment, but it's Google, it's Teams, it's all these other things. And having most of my controls on the hardware side means that it doesn't matter what I jump into. I have kind of complete control over how that's going to look. Go ahead, Jason.
F19's never failed me, not in 4 years.
Next question.
Peter Moore, Auckland, New Zealand. OBS has been stellar in Linux and Windows forever. Can anyone attest to how the Apple M-Series chip OBS version works? I use OBS on Linux here, along with DaVinci Resolve full GPU acceleration. Awesome experience for anyone new wanting to try it out.
Jeffrey?
So with OBS, if there's anything that I absolutely need to do, I have OBS loaded on my M1, and I have used it for very simple tasks. I don't want to put a whole show through it. You got to remember that OBS is open software. There's a lot of, and with open software on a Mac, you can run into a lot of security issues, which is one of the things. The other thing is metal, and there hasn't been it as it's open source. They want the community to write code that's actually going to work with OBS. And I think that's the biggest stumbling block in this whole situation. So yeah, it doesn't work that well, but it's great for if you're just doing a one-person camera going to YouTube. I would use it there, but in a bigger production, I'd probably leave it behind and go for something else like Mimo Live.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. How much RAM would you get for an iPhone-based camera rig? How large an external SSD do you recommend?
Good, Mickey.
My answer wouldn't necessarily be just for iPhones, but with any production recording media, I would do the math on how much footage you expect to be recording in any single given day, and also take a look at where the balance is and price per gigabyte or price per terabyte. I believe, at least in my market, the balance is somewhere in either 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte SSDs. So do the math there, and as well as how much storage you need based on the codec and also resolution you'll be recording. Add some headroom, of course.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, it's changed because we have now Camera Raw and some other things that take a little more, but their efficiency is pretty good on the iPhone system right now. I was just looking. I have 512 gigabytes on my iPhone that I use for most of my video work.
And we're assuming this is drive speed, not RAM, because RAM, you don't have any choice over. So it's, but I'm just annotating. That.
Okay. So anyway, I have that capacity, and I still have 349 gigs left. I will probably clean some of that off before NAB because I want to store as much as possible on the phone and not have to run with an external drive unless I absolutely have to. So, but it's been really good for me to have. So half a terabyte is pretty good. I'm sorry, 512 gigabytes has been a pretty good storage thing on the phone for me.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason, real quick.
Ditto on the 512, and for external, I like OWC's tiny little jump drive.
We'll be talking about sound in conference rooms here in just a second. Just a quick reminder that, of course, the rest of the week is pretty exciting. We've got FX Factory here tomorrow. So Nicholas Bond will be here on tomorrow to talk about FX Factory. On Friday, we'll talk about what we did and how we did it for the Eclipse. So we did the coverage. We'll give you a little behind the scenes of what that took to do it. Saturday and Sunday, of course, our Q&A, and we will be standing up all of our NAB coverage. So you'll see us you'll probably get some glimpses in after hours as we kind of put those pieces together. So stay tuned for that. And also just a quick reminder that your support is very welcomed. Go to officehours.global/donate and help us continue to make these shows possible. Welcome back to the second hour. We're really excited to have Tom Kehr here today. Audio in conference rooms is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. So I have shot probably 500 to 1,000 different inserts from a conference room in many, many corporations, large ones, small ones, and I've probably been in 2 or 3 that were good, so that were solid. Obviously, not ones that Tom worked on. But it's a really huge challenge. A lot of times we've built a lot of the conference rooms. And even meeting rooms, rooms that are designed for virtual connections have been designed for how they look and not how they sound. And that has just created just a real challenge for a lot of us. So we're really excited to actually talk to an expert. Tom Kehr is a systems designer and trainer for Almo Professional A. And Tom, welcome to the show.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you here. And can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, basically, like many of you, been in the industry for a long time. Started on the audio side, did audiovisual design for a long time, actually was a senior staff instructor with Avixa for a number of years, and now basically doing pre-sales design and training with Exertis Almo.
That's great. And I understand you have a couple things to show us. Before we get into that, what do you think is the number one thing that people miss when they're designing a conference room?
They don't design for the humans. What I think gets missed is that humans are using the same interface, the same eyes and ears, ever since we were drawing on cave walls. And instead of designing for the humans, they like to throw boxes at it because the technology is cool.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I understand that you have a little something to show, and I think we should jump right into it and have you give us kind of a preview of how you approach what you do.
Yeah, and this is basically, and this was an hour-long presentation. I've got some PowerPoints. Sorry about that. Mm-hmm. And this is each space has each space has its unique requirements, so that the room itself performs and is fitted to the task. Right. The first thing we want to know is what's the intended use of the space. And maybe it's the dreaded gymicafetorium, which is the multi-purpose space that's supposed to do all things, but doesn't do any one thing well. So meeting rooms and classrooms is what we'll focus on today. You can talk about the humans needing to be able to see, and not just see, but be able to read and comprehend, but that's not what we're really talking about today. So how do we accomplish this? Really, we match the environment and apply technology to the limitations and needs of people. So really, a meeting room, classroom, and I lump both those together, they're about human factors and ergonomics, and then we apply technology around those criteria. And we'll focus basically on acoustics and background noise today. So value engineering, what's the first thing that typically gets eliminated in a building project when they start talking about value engineering? And you know that, it's acoustical treatment. This is what happens when you incorrectly value engineer. You lose usefulness. You lose functionality. You make things harder than they should be. Now, you can take a look at some of these rooms. You can pull pictures of these off the net all day long, these small little meeting rooms, and a couple of others. All right, what are some common features? Displays, yes. What else? They've got some means for audio conferencing. They also have glass, hard reflective walls, thin commercial carpet, and thin commercial carpet does very little to absorb sound energy. It's really too thin when compared to the wavelengths in our audible spectrum. So what they all have in common, lots of hard reflective surfaces, hardly anything that's going to absorb any sound energy except maybe the acoustic ceiling tiles. And the room here to the left, this looks like the wall goes up, there's a chandelier. There may not even be any absorptive.
Well, and one of the things that I think that's really one of the challenges is this idea that, hey, there's been this interest in all this glass, and glass is just the devil. Like, and it is. And I just feel like when you, I walked into a conference room. This is one of the few conference rooms. There was a company that spends a lot of time on audio. So I walked into it and there was no glass. And I was like, who designed this? And they're like, we did. This is hard stuff. But it was all soft walls and it had like they had like, if you touch the walls, it was fabric. And they had behind it, it was, and they had things hanging out. They asked you not to touch the walls. But there was one glass side so you could see it, and it was at an angle. Like it was, but you could tell that someone had thought about what that was going to take to make that actually sound good. And it sounded good no matter what you did, no matter where you put the mics, no matter what you did there. But it seems like, what we get more often than that is fish bowls. We're going to put three sides of glass on the wall. And it's very hard for us. It's hard to describe to people that there's just no way to fix that.
Yeah. And one wall of glass is fine. If you do something with the wall opposite to it. You can be fine with that. And I understand you want to be able, with daylighting, sustainability, all those kind of things, you want kind of an open office concept. I get that part. But all glass, it's supposed to be form follows function. And usually when we get into these pro AV spaces, it's like, okay, here's the form, now make it function.
Yeah.
And without the technology, the first and foremost, this goes back to the humans, make the room comfortable for the humans so that they can interact and communicate with each other in that same room. Forget about the far side for a moment. Just make it comfortable for the people sitting around the table to communicate.
Right. Yeah.
That's the part that gets forgotten about.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And I've seen you guys do some of this before. Absorption, reflection, transmission. And law of conservation of energy tells us that energy can't be created or destroyed, only changed from one form to another. So something has to happen to the sound energy as it propagates. Okay. As the sound energy encounters a barrier material, one of three things is going to happen. You've got absorption. This is where the energy gets absorbed into the material it encounters. The material actually slows down the air molecules using friction. You've got reflection. This is where the sound energy reflects off of a surface, and the energy of the sound stays in the room. If the surface is flat relative to wavelength, this is going to be a direct, hard, also known as specular reflection. And like with light, the angle of incident is going to equal the angle of reflection. In other words, the incoming angle, same as the outgoing angle. The other type of reflection is a diffuse reflection. This is where the sound energy, again, stays in the room, but the energy is scattered in all different directions. If you think about projection and a matte white screen, that's known as a diffusion screen. The light that hits it gets scattered back out in all different directions. Same thing. And sometimes this gets forgotten about. Transmission. This is where the energy is transmitted into an adjoining space. Not just walls, but ceilings and floors. And in reality, you're going to have a combination of all this. The thing about transmission, if you can hear somebody on the other side of the wall, they can hear you equally as well. Okay, STC sound transmission class, that works bidirectionally. And sometimes people forget about that.
And that's a challenge with different wavelengths, right? I mean, so
it is.
The smaller wavelengths might get stopped, but the lower ones oftentimes are much harder to get rid of.
Oh, yeah. It's the low frequency energy is going to, unless you have a lot of mass,
right?
Be able to stop that. But again, if it's not transmitted, it stays in the room. So you have to account for all that. When we talk about absorption, porous absorption is most effective when placed at a distance from a room boundary where the particle velocity is maximum. If you think about it, this is roughly a quarter wavelength position where the particle velocity is at maximum. Because if you're down, at the zero line, the particles are at rest basically. So any absorption is not going to work there. So quarter wavelength is really what we're looking for. But with something like a 100 hertz tone, this is roughly 1 meter from the boundary. So placing porous absorbers directly on a room boundary, not as effective. You need it a little bit away from the boundary. Again, quarter wavelength of frequency of interest is what you're looking for. And if you want to know how big wavelength is, it's a simple calculation. Wavelength is speed of sound over frequency. So 1130 feet per second over frequency. If you go from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, what we call our audible spectrum, you've got everything from 56.5 feet long to less than 3/4 of an inch long. And mid-band or so is about a foot, 1K. And if you want to think about it this way, 1K is about a foot. If you double the frequency, that's about a 6-inch long wave. You go the other way, you go from 1,000 hertz to 500 hertz. You went from 1 foot to a 2-foot long wave, roughly speaking.
And that helps kind of guide, if you're building a barrier or building mass, how thick that barrier has to be.
Yeah, once you get into, oh, wow, these things actually have a physical size associated with them. What happens when something of this size encounters a boundary of this size? It's going to tell you what happens. So with these specular reflections, what we get into is basically, it's like a mirror maze. Whoops, one too far. It's like a mirror maze, except with light, we're talking sound.
Right. Yeah.
So that makes it really rough.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's all sorts of absorbers, all sorts of colors, all the other kind of stuff. These are diffusers. This is what actually breaks up the sound when it encounters a boundary and reflects it back out into different directions. So they come in all different sizes and shapes. When somebody comes in, hey, we just want to throw up some fuzz on the wall. No. If you really want to get serious, you need to find an acoustical consultant, because two main things with this. What needs to go in the room, number one, and where does it go, number two? And really, the only way to do that properly is to do a proper, impulse response to the room, do some real room analysis.
And it's impulse before and after, right? So you're figuring out what do you have there, and then you have to go back and after you put it in, test it and see what's happening.
Yeah, and I've had people do this before. They have an acoustical consultant come out, and the guy spends half hour, 45 minutes in the room, and then they go back, oh, well, you wouldn't hear very long, you wouldn't worth much. And what they don't understand is their work is actually done in the post-process method.
Right.
Okay, taking that information back, those quick measurements that they did, going back and figuring out what's going on in the room.
And what are they typically using for that? What is the typical software for that and mics?
There's a variety. You can do it with ARTA. You can do it with wave capture. There's a bunch of software out there where you can just capture an IR. And there's two ways to play that game. Are you measuring the loudspeaker? Or are you measuring the room?
Right. And are they using sweeps, or are they using impulses?
Sweeps, typically, because you get better signal to noise ratio out of that.
Yeah.
Using a log sweep. Yeah. That's really what you're looking for. You can do an impulse if you've got a really quiet, controlled space.
Right.
But you get into a larger space, sine sweep is really a nice way to go.
Absolutely.
And again, are you trying to analyze the loudspeaker, through transfer function, or are you trying to do the room? So if you're just trying to do the loudspeaker itself, you apply what's called a time window. So you basically window out the reflections that are in the room, and you're just getting what's going on with the loudspeaker, because really that's the only thing you can fix electronically.
And, I will say a lot of times if I'm going to test something, I try to find a time that I can go work there for a while. So, I've had many rooms where I sit in there, and when I walk in, it seems fine. But if I sit for 2 or 3 hours just doing email, I can hear, I can start to hear, oh, there's traffic outside, or this happens here, or that happens there. So even though the impulse tells you, or what the measurements tell you what's going on inside, the outside also becomes a challenge.
Or you're over the flight path of the local airport.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and some you can't. I built a studio, and we didn't. We did do a fair bit, and it sounded great until they started pounding pylons right next to us in DC. We were so excited, because it's really hard to get rid of that sound.
Yeah, one guy I know bought a building to do a soundstage, and discovered after he bought the building that the commuter train was running next to the building.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you got diffusion.
And again, this is reflection. Is it going to be a hard specular reflection? You're going to break up that reflection, really what it is. And transmission, you can find these reference charts and everything else. This is just some general wall construction as to, and the numbers here basically in decibels, how much do you expect the level to drop from one side of the partition to the other? And this assumes you don't have any flanking pads, you don't have any holes in the partition, all the other kind of stuff.
Right.
So this is just all part of it. I use this illustration a lot out of Springer Handbook of Acoustics to help people understand that, hey, the people in the room are not just listening to the direct sound from the loudspeaker or source.
Right.
It's bouncing off of all the surfaces in the room, and it's arriving to the listener at some point later in time than the direct sound.
Well, and it's basically like, if you think about it as a lot of times we just think of it as a foot a millisecond a foot, like as a rough guide.
Right.
And so if you look at this diagram, what you see is this idea that, well, it's going to take, let's say, it's going to take 10 milliseconds to get to the listener directly, but you can see that distance off the reflection is going to be 3 times that. So it's going to be 30 milliseconds. And the one off the back is going to be 4 times that. It's going to be 40 milliseconds. And that's where our reflections come from. It's great.
And if I take an auditorium, let's say this auditorium's 100 feet deep, all right, and that listener's halfway back. You got 50 milliseconds to get to them. You're 50 milliseconds past, another 50 milliseconds to the back of their head. That is a reflection 100 milliseconds out in time later than the direct sound. That comes back as a discrete echo, which is typically why in an auditorium, the first thing you want to do is treat that back wall. Yeah. To deaden the reflections off that back wall. And, I walk into a room and I see these curved walls and stuff. I'm like, oh, no.
Yeah, because that's a lot harder to figure out how to. Curved walls are
domes and curved walls.
Yeah.
Absolutely bad news.
Yeah, I've worked in a place where they have a whole circle of glass.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't work. I've been in churches where they have a round choir room, right?
Yeah.
And then they try and hold a class in the room, and there's no intelligibility whatsoever.
Yeah.
But it's pretty.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a rule of thumb. If the room is pretty, you're in trouble. Seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think that there can be things done. As I said before, there's one conference room that I walked into where they covered the whole thing with fabric. So it looked pretty. I mean, it looked very, quiet. I don't know how long it would last. I don't know how often they have to replace that fabric, but I think it was probably 3 inches deep of absorption. And then, with posts and then they had everything suspended out from it. So it was the whiteboards and the monitors and everything else. Nothing really touched the walls.
Yeah, you don't want to go too dead because actually reflections give you the sense of spaciousness for the room.
Right.
I mentioned if the room's pretty, you're in trouble. This goes to a deeper level. If it's won an architectural design award, you're really in trouble.
Yeah. Because architectural design is there's a magazine for that, not a podcast.
I don't even know if I should say this on here, but it's what I call architorture as far as sound.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And this gets into the sound field. This is courtesy of SynodCon. You've got the direct sound. This is your first arrival. You've got the early reflections. And once you get past about 50 milliseconds, you can start calling those late reflections or echoes.
Right.
And as these reflections continue and die out, that's where you get into reverberation. Now, really, are these reflections good reflections or bad reflections? It depends.
Right.
If it's within about 10 milliseconds after the direct sound, yeah, your ear-brain system integrates it, but this is where you get the tonal coloration, tonality shifts. Right. It really sounds, this is the toilet bowl kind of sound. Once you get past 10 milliseconds with speech up to about 30 milliseconds, your ear-brain system integrates them and it's fine.
Right.
Yeah, you get by with that just fine. You can start to discern an echo around 50 milliseconds afterwards with speech. So when you do auditorium design, meeting room design, these are kind of things you need to keep in mind. Again, you don't want the room too dead. So as you take a look, this is the same picture again. You walk in, you look at this, it's like, not my favorite room. And we haven't even talked about background noise yet. We're just talking about the sound signature of the room itself.
Yeah.
How does it sound when people are talking and trying to communicate with one another?
Yeah. Yeah, and it is. I mean, you look at one of those things and you just see immediately, like, well, there's a lot of windows, there's a lot of glass. This is going to be exciting. I bring typically 50 to 60 feet worth of moving blankets with C-stands and everything else when we shoot. Pretty much anything outside the camera, like that's what I have right now.
Anything to deaden it, yeah.
Anything outside of the camera, I'm just going to lay it all out and try to absorb as much as I can.
Yeah, and when you've got these parallel surfaces, this is a video out of actually Infocom. He's going to clap twice, and then he's going to slow it down. There's your sound signature.
Right.
It's awful.
Right.
And that's I know where their room is. It's just a small conference room.
Yeah, and has this become a lot more important now that we're doing because of the hybrid meetings, the hybrid workplace, people are not, a lot of meetings are not happening all in the conference room. Have you seen a stronger demand on redesigning the conference rooms?
I've seen a stronger demand for people wanting technology in the conference rooms. Now, honestly, when you're doing Brady Bunch, basically one-on-one like we're doing here, almost any knuckle-dragging Neanderthal can handle a one-on-one.
Right.
It is when you do the one-to-many.
Right.
So you've got the many in the one room, and the one on the far side is still getting a less than stellar experience.
Right.
Because people are still, you got a camera in the room, they're still sitting on the far side of the table.
Well,
so you got a bowling alley shot. It's just...
I mean, for years, for us, if you call us and there's four of us in the call, we'll all go to separate rooms. We'll all just go. We'll just all disperse and we'll all be online. We won't go into a conference room because we just can't guarantee that.
Or the four of you talk amongst yourselves, and the fifth one at the far side goes, "What am I even doing here?"
Yeah.
They basically get ignored. And I've been a remote worker since 2008.
Yeah.
I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, mostly the bad and the ugly, and that has nothing to do with the people I've been conferencing with. Yeah. It's just the experience. More often than not, it would have to be bad to get better.
No, we have a lot of questions stacking up. So what I'm going to do is Marty's got one question for you, or a couple questions, and then we're going to jump into some of the. I know that you have more to show. We'll get back to it if we can, but I think this has been great. There's really, really gems to cover, but I think we've got a couple questions stacking up here. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, so I go into a lot of meeting rooms and conference rooms and auditoriums and most notoriously houses of worship. And these are rooms whose primary purpose is the facilitation of speech communications. And you got to wonder, how can these rooms fail at that purpose so spectacularly? It's like, and they're all designed by professional architects.
Mm-hmm.
So
we had a situation. We were in Europe, and there was this conference room that had just been finished, and they'd spent millions of dollars on it, and we had to tell them hey, we can't hear what you're saying. And they're like, well, this is the way the system is designed to do it. We just finished it, and we were like, I'm sorry. There was nothing else we could say other than I'm sorry. And Tom, do you see any acoustical? Is acoustics becoming more important, at least from the core design, or is it just they just want more processing?
The thing is the electronic stuff that we have now, like the beamforming ceiling microarrays and stuff. I mean, I've been around long enough where somebody wanted to put ceiling.
But I think we might have lost Tom there for a second. Uh-oh. Yeah, this is the challenge, of course, with the
microphones on the ceiling. These folks say no.
We lost you there for a second, Tom.
Yeah, sorry about that. People want to throw more technology at it rather than fix the core issue. Yeah. And this is not a slam on architects. I've got a friend of mine, his son was studying architecture, and acoustics was merely a distant elective.
Right.
So they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And I did a class years ago similar to this, acoustics for small rooms. Did a bunch of architects lunch and learn so they get AIA credits, and that was one of the most receptive audiences I've ever had. So it's not they're not doing this to us on purpose. It's just they don't understand the whole acoustics part of it, and it's hard because you can put let's put a 21.9 display. It's something you can see, and I love the 21.9 displays. They're wonderful. But acoustics sound, you don't have that same kind of tactile interface other than, I don't think this sounds good. So it's different that way. So I think that's a lot of why acoustics gets left out. And the house of worship thing, a lot of these are drywall boxes. If I'm doing any sort of auditorium, house of worship, the first cat I want to hire is an acoustical consultant to make sure that room sizes and shapes are done correctly, room adjacencies are done correctly, and they work with the mechanical engineer to make sure that the background noise level is low enough. I did a site survey for some folks. One time they were having a hard time hearing a brand new house of worship, and I took my measurement in and did an NC in the back row. It was between NC 49 to NC 52. Yeah. And the HVAC was blowing so hard, the vents were in the back you can almost feel the hair on the back of my head blowing up.
The funny thing is, when I work in Africa, we get lots of buildings. They're all built with concrete blocks, and what's amazing is that you get some reflection if you don't cover those up, but you don't get a lot of transmission. It's pretty quiet. You have a problem.
They're better if you leave them unpainted too.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, and for many of us who are working from home, the modern home is really not designed for this well.
No.
We've started taking the walls out, we put all this glass in, there's all this stone, and I've had lots of conversations with people about where they want to put their home office and the communication. And sometimes I get the strangest response, which is, yeah, but they sound great. That's true, but that's not your problem. And people sometimes disconnect what they're hearing with what they sound like, I've found.
Yeah, and that's why, and most everyone on here, it's wonderful. There is no substitute for getting a microphone close to a face.
Yeah, we get into a lot of conversations about that because people will say, well, I can move it, I can move the mic away. I'm like, yeah, but there's physics. There's a certain level of there's a certain limit of it.
Shorten up D sub S. And I'm in the same position. Okay, the house that I have here, I'm literally in what could be considered the dining room, but circumstances were such, because of the divorce, everything else 8 years ago, I'm fortunate to have, I'm right off the kitchen. So if somebody, my mom still lives here, if somebody's in the kitchen or dogs bark, UPS shows up, any of that kind of stuff, there are going to be interruptions sometimes. It's just part of working from home. The other part is, how do you handle those interruptions? Right. You remember and this video kind of went viral. The guy was on BBC and his kids come bursting in the door and then his wife tries to drag him out and he's all embarrassed. It's just an awkward look. And there's another, again, BBC, where, this gal's talking along, being interviewed, and her daughter's in the background, and the guy says, what's your daughter's name? And it just brought everything, the anxiety level down.
Right.
Interruptions are going to happen. How do you handle them? You expect to see people's kids. You expect to hear the dogs. You expect to hear the doorbell. Stuff is going to happen.
And a lot of this stuff is moving forward because of all this hybrid work. I was actually brought in to do a talk for an architectural firm they're building apartment complexes. And one of the things that they asked me to do is talk about, they're looking at building rooms. So it'll be like a 3-bedroom apartment, but one of the bedrooms is designed for virtual work, and so they're kind of building these in where that they don't do it to the whole house, but they're basically thickening the walls. They're building it they make the walls a little irregular. They're doing all these things to the wall. They put fiber into that one room. And so there's all these things that they're doing to make it so that if you had a room if you wanted to use a room for a virtual, for meetings, and that all came post-COVID, and that's when they brought us in and to talk about it. It was like they're trying to figure out, how do we build things that people want to buy or rent, that it has one room you can just use it as a regular bedroom, but it also can double as a virtual place where if you want to put an office in there, that's the one to do it in. Right.
And if you're old enough, you convert the den, right?
Yeah, that's what I did. That's what this is. This was like a den, and what I have here is I have moving blankets all the way around because it's 20 feet high. It's all wood.
Oh wow!
And so mine is mine is like, but I ruined it because I got all these moving blankets all just wrapped around me to make sure, because this mic is completely unusable without the moving blankets. Like, you can't even hear me talk.
And I've got one guy I know. He's got a travel trailer in the backyard, and he uses that for his office.
Yeah. So it's an interesting place where we're going with it. We've got a ton of questions stacking up. We're going to go ahead and jump to those questions. Let's go ahead and go to the first one.
Andy Kokendorfer in VR, Florida is up first. He says, what tools do you bring to a customer location to judge room acoustics?
Good, Courtney.
One of which is just my eyes. Seriously. And I can... And this is a good judge right here. Let me go ahead and pull this up. And this is just kind of a very lowbrow, low-budget spreadsheet. And if you look at some of the metrics, and this is out of ASA, it's out of a GSA document. Basically, what they're saying is the RT60 time, 0.6 or less, over 500 hertz, 1K, and 2K. So a typical meeting room here, 30 by 20, 9-foot ceiling, so 5,400 cubic feet. Carpet, acoustic ceiling tiles, and gypsum on all 4 walls. That meets the criteria for RT60. Oh, but we have a taller ceiling. Let's put in a 12-foot ceiling. Now I'm outside the criteria. The problem with this is you have added additional reflective surface without additional absorptive surface. So as far as the RT60, if I just have a typical room, I can meet that. If you want to do, and this is why bedrooms sound as bad as they do, an empty bedroom, nobody likes the sound of an empty bedroom. You fill with furniture and people, it sounds a whole lot different. You know, if I do away with that reflective drop tile, my numbers go to rot. You know,
Right.
it's just, so in some rooms, your only help is going to be the acoustic ceiling tile. If I can get another room in there and I don't have, let's just do drape for nothing else, I can start lowering the numbers. So can I get some absorptive surfaces? And if I do absorptive surfaces, I want to do it on adjoining walls, not opposite walls. That's why I don't mind one glass wall, that's fine, but the opposite wall I definitely want to treat. The other part of this, and people forget about this, is the acoustic signal to noise of the space. In other words, how loud is this with just the HVAC running? And again, if you go to the ANSI standards, if you go to ASHRAE, American Society of Refrigeration, Air Conditioning Engineers, I always get that acronym wrong, and you look at what the background noise, maximum background noise that they specify, it is an RC25 to RC30. That is a quiet space. Now to go in and do that, I simply use, and I'll drag it over for a moment. I didn't know if we were going to get into this, but a thing called Studio 6 Digital. Okay, it's just an app, and with the calibrated mic, the iTest Mic 2, I can come in and do SPL, I can do RC, I can do NC ratings, I can do all of those kinds of things to quantify the background noise levels, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to put numbers to things to assess whether or not this is an appropriate space, whether or not this is usable. So that's just part of what I do there.
Right.
And again, these are set by standard. This isn't rocket surgery. Is the room appropriate or not? We were up, this has been a few months back, we were up at an experience center for a well-known microphone manufacturer outside Chicago. And there's probably 10 of us in the room, 12 of us in the room. And this room is 42 by 32 because I counted ceiling tiles. And it's like, okay, everybody shut up for a moment because I was really liking the room. And I measured an NC of 29. Somebody paid attention to the acoustics.
Right.
Didn't need any in-room reinforcement, and conversation was comfortable. And this is I'm talking about the human experience. If you have to try and pull out the conversation, or if what's on the screen is too small, you have to exert effort.
We call it cognitive load. And you're adding all this cognitive load to what people are doing. And I think what people think of as Zoom fatigue and other things is that you're trying to pull that out. I know that in a lot of conference rooms, I for a long time spent about 6 hours a day as a remote in a conference room, and it was brutal because you're not listening to what they're saying. You're just trying to hear what they're saying. Like you don't even think about what the concepts are.
And then the human gets fatigued, and when the human gets fatigued, the human stops listening, the human stops looking.
Yeah.
So then no communication is taking place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Courtney, do you want to add something?
When I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what Tom uses, but when I go to a room, a location to evaluate the acoustics, I use some fairly sophisticated instruments. I use impulse generators, which is this, and I use my two ears. And I've gotten used over the years to just being able to evaluate just by clapping in a room. I can tell, okay, there's water standpipes for the sprinkler system in that wall. So we're going to have to do something with that because that gives you a very sharp twang reflection. And, you'll hear the standing waves from the parallel walls. Mm-hmm. And you'll hear the traffic from the outside world coming through the windows or through a wall. Or you'll hear the HVAC system or the elevator noise. It's, there's an elevator room right outside this wall, and every time the elevator dings, you're going to hear it. So you have to deal with all those things and what refrigerators are in the room, et cetera. So I'm not sure what and of course I'm evaluating the acoustics just for recording voices, nothing louder than voices, not for sound reinforcement where you're putting speakers in the room. But I was wondering if Tom uses any types of electronic equipment or just basically what God gave him.
Well, again, first, use your own eyes and ears. But like I say, the Studio 6, because most of what I'm doing is small conference room stuff, relatively small conference room stuff. Even for auditoria and such, I can do background noise levels. I'm not set up at the moment to do IRs. I lost that when I changed jobs with the software a couple of years back. So if it's a larger auditorium or something where I actually have to do some acoustical analysis, then I would do IR. In fact, I've been looking at packages to be able to do that again. So here shortly, I may be investing in another software package to be able to do that, because I need to be able to measure loudspeakers, need to be able to analyze rooms. So that's kind of but for the small stuff, just being able to use Studio 6 and a calibrated mic. And this is another thing. Oh, I've got an app. Okay, you've got an app. That's not an instrument.
Right.
The nice thing about Studio 6 is the iTest mic that you plug in, all the calibration files are with the mic. So as soon as I plug it into the SMAART device, I have a calibrated microphone. So I actually have an instrument to be able to take measurements.
Good, Ronnie.
I'll make it really short. We use the exact same app. I don't use calibrated microphones, but we use Audio Tools app to measure the general frequency spectrum of the room. Of course, my ears is really, really important. And the other thing I tend to do is to be aware that I'm saturated when I'm in the room. So I just make a 1-minute recording of the room and analyze that when I'm coming back to the office.
Yeah, I can still do RT60 because I have my original TerraSound Audio Toolbox contractor version. Anybody old enough to remember what that is? In fact, the same guy that built the TerraSound, Andrew Smith, I believe is his name, is the same guy that wrote the software for Studio 6 Digital, Andrew Smith.
Let's jump to the next question.
Zach Stallsmith in Chicago, New York says, for mic placement, would ceiling array mics or individual mics at each chair work better for conversations?
Nothing beats putting a mic close to a human. Here's a video that you can check out later. And this is off of YouTube. Okay, microphone selection for conference rooms. This is something that Eric Bateman did. You can see it's done 12 years ago. This is before we had the beamforming ceiling arrays. And he goes between a gooseneck and a boundary and a couple of different ceiling mics. What's interesting, and he balances the levels really well, is as he goes from the ceiling mic back to the gooseneck, you can actually feel yourself relax because you're not having to strain as much to hear. Now, that being said, the beamforming ceiling mic arrays, some of these things are wonderful. Because we tried all sorts of things years ago when people didn't want microphones on the table. You had one manufacturer that did the plexiglass disc. You had the Audio Science big plexiglass thing with a PZM in the corner. There's all sorts of, we hung shotgun mics. There's all sorts of crazy stuff we did over the years, all with varying levels of unsuccess. And the beamformers have come out, and some of them are really good, stunningly good, as compared to what we used to do. But like the microphones that we're using today on the call here, they all sound a little different. So they are not all the same.
Yeah.
Some have their DSP built in, some don't. Anyway, so really you kind of need to listen to them to see what's appropriate. That's the easiest thing to do in most rooms because people don't want mics on the table. But nothing beats a mic that's close up, bottom line.
And it's really, it's just less, it's more or less good, but it's never great. Like when you start doing the beamforming, in my opinion, it's
unless you want to start getting real mics and start doing, boom arms.
Yeah, exactly. Next question.
Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia. Do you have design recommendations for audio treatment of virtual conference room, aka our Zoom live stream offices? I'm struggling with what to consider for audio treatment if I want 2 camera angles as my blankets are in the way.
Number one, take a look at the materials you currently have in the room. Is it all drywall, including a drywall ceiling? Then you've got to fix some of that. The other thing is, what is your background noise level? Now, you can talk with some of the acoustical treatment suppliers, and some of them have kind of, if it's just a box, that you're working in, drywall box, they have some general recommendations that might work out pretty well. One, and I've got some samples over here, they can actually do some absorptive panels with whatever design you want on them. So it can actually look like a logo or a painting or whatever. So it doesn't have to look like a large gray panel. So they can do some screen printing on it. So there's a variety of things you can do with that, but I would look at what are you starting with. The other thing is too, when we talk room modes, this is where basically a room dimension, okay, and width, length, height, at some wavelength, that room dimension is going to be half a wavelength and multiples thereof. So as far as the low frequency performance of the room, it's a complete crapshoot. What you don't want is this dimension to reinforce the same modes as this dimension and this dimension. And if you want to look it up, you can look up what's called the golden room ratios. So if you have some flexibility there, you can kind of work with the low end performance. And you want to know where the cutoff is for that, where room modes dominate. It's basically 3 times the speed of sound over the room's smallest dimension. So the room that I have here now at home, 8 foot tall, so 3390 divided by 8, 423 hertz. And that's a transition, okay? So basically, when I start getting around 500 hertz and below, as far as low frequency performance, the room modes are going to dominate the low frequency performance. And there's nothing I can do about that. But if you're just looking for just a quick, and can I say this? You may wish to, I've gotten a lot more selective with things that I buy off of big e-commerce sites because of the quality that may or may not be there. So on those kinds of things, I would go with a known acoustical treatment manufacturer that can give you some recommendations for that. But again, when you do it, adjoining walls, you don't necessarily have to treat parallel walls or walls that are parallel from one another, and you still got floor to ceiling to deal with. So that's another one to consider. So if you don't have drop tile, you may have to do something with your ceiling. And I was going to say put in shag carpet, but
the 70s. We're back to the 70s.
It's got to be orange though.
Yeah. With brown. Next question.
Taken out of a van. Mark Giuliani, Washington, D.C. Do you recommend partitions that have an air gap between 2 layers of studs to isolate vibration and reduce outside noises?
How critical are the outside noises? If you're next to a street, you've probably got glass there anyway. It's kind of a law of diminishing returns when you get into that kind of construction. How private does that room need to be, really? I mean, that's kind of the question that I think you're trying to address. You can do the metal studs with insulation in between. That's actually better than wood studs because the metal studs actually have some flexibility to them. So some of that, the wall actually acts as a bit of a membrane absorber at lower frequencies. Then you can do staggered studs on a common sill plate, and then you go to basically 2 walls on 2 separate sill plates. But again, law of diminishing returns for that. How quiet does that room really need to be? And instead of all the construction, do you have an interior room? Do you have? And this is something I think people forget. Is there a better space available to be able to do this in?
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Ronnie Hasso at Tromsø, Norway. How to reduce reflection on large boardroom tables? Should we add some type of fabric or something else on top of the table?
Yeah, the boardroom table, if that's the only reflective surface in it, I'm not going to bug too much over it. Again, you can get the RT 60 times down reasonably well by just wall treatment and the rest of it. They're going to have their table. There's really not much you can do about that. In fact, they probably paid as much for the table as they did for the audiovisual that's going into the room, maybe more. So they probably don't want you to put anything on top of the table anyway. So that's where I just, you can't, you're not going to be able to, I don't want to say dictate, but you're not going to be able to recommend fixing everything. So make the recommendations where you think you can get some wins.
Next question.
Mickey Makachor in Manila in the Philippines asks, how do sound masking systems in conference rooms influence your design and vice versa?
See, and sometimes this is the misconception with sound masking systems. Oh, we've got a lot of noise in this room. We'll use a sound masking system. No, that's not how that works. If you want to keep conversations private in a room, what you do is you employ sound masking outside of that room, so that outside of that room, you are lowering the acoustic signal to noise, so that what does get transmitted through the wall basically gets buried or comes in below the acoustic noise floor. And what you're doing with the sound masking system is you're intentionally raising the acoustic noise floor. And the other, call it speech privacy, call it masking building system noises, whatever you want to do. That's what you're trying to do, is you are intentionally trying to reduce the acoustic signal to noise in a space, which is not what you want to do in the conference room itself. In fact, I've had this before. It's like, we can hear all these conversations in the adjoining rooms. We want to do sound masking. I'm like, okay, the problem that you're having is not a sound masking problem. The problem is the construction. You've already built it. You've done nothing to mitigate the sound transmission from one space to another. You've got a construction problem. Sometimes I hate to be that blunt, but
yeah,
that's where it is.
Next question.
Zach Stallsmith is back from Chautauqua, New York. Has anyone used the Shure Ecosystem in conference room settings? And if so, pros and cons?
Have you used
Ecosystem talking STEM?
I'm guessing.
Yeah, the STEM system is one that was actually STEM Audio before Shure bought them. It is one way to do that because you've got the STEM wall, you've got the STEM ceiling, you've got various things. It really, again, two big things. What does the room sound like before you try and put in any electronic wonder junk? And what is your background noise level? Because the lower the noise level, the better the acoustics, the better the electronics, whoever you choose to get them from are going to be. And this is my big thing. Fix the room first. I work for a pro AV distributor. Love to sell you stuff all day long. Absolutely. It's at some point you got to sell something to still eat. But fix the knowns.
Right.
Because people still have to communicate within the room. Make it easy for them.
Next question.
Marty Atias in Maryland says, how do the dimensions of a room affect acoustics?
Really, room modes more than anything else in smaller rooms. Well, there are a couple of things. In auditorium, the shoebox still works really well because of the reflections that add in with the direct sound. They add in within the integration period. Fan-shaped auditorium, I know they're all the rage in like house of worship and everything else, but they really don't have the way they're situated. The reflections really don't become supporting reflections in the room. So I'm not, and I know it's for sight lines and everything else, so I'm not a huge fan of fan-shaped rooms. So that's part of it. Ceiling also factors into that. The back wall, can I get it treated? So it really depends. But again, the dumb old shoebox really has been a time-tested design.
Yeah.
But, you get rooms that are too large. Even the shoebox doesn't work because the reflections are too far out in time.
Right. Next question.
Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois is next and wants to talk about sound control inside walls, which is preferable, wood or metal studs.
I think we covered this a little bit, but go ahead.
Yeah, if you're trying to lower the transmission between one to the other, then you would be using metal studs.
Interesting. Next question.
Dave Troutman, Edmonton, Canada. I work often in a room with a convex curved wall concealing storage space behind it. Is concave the most trouble compared to convex curves?
Convex is worse. Concave, okay, that's where it actually works as more of a diffuser than convex. Convex focuses sound like a dome ceiling. So convex walls, dome ceilings, bad news. Concave, not so, it'll hit it and break it up into different directions. So
next question.
Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Felt or foam for home office, quote, studio treatment, and how thick? Also smooth or like an egg carton?
My first question would be, does the material have real specifications? In other words, do they have a an absorption coefficient for at each of the frequencies. How effective is it at the frequency of interest? How thick is it? How far off the wall are you going to mount it? Because you can do just the regular plain panels. You don't have to go egg crate looking stuff. And the other thing I'd be looking at, flame retardancy. Again, this is where, and I did this not too long ago, I actually bought something off of a large e-commerce site, and it wasn't as effective as I was expecting it to be. So I'm looking for products with real specifications, not just a list of features, but numbers, so I can quantify. I want to know the absorption coefficients at these various frequencies. If they really can't give you that information, then it's not really a product that I can rely on.
Next question.
Mickey Makachor, Manila in the Philippines, is back. How do you deal with venues that have historically been designed for propagation and subsequent reverberation of sound, such as houses of worship and coliseums, to make it more conducive for sound reinforcement as well?
Yeah, haven't done any coliseums. For some houses of worship, typically the more liturgical styles have a longer preferable RT60 time to support choirs and organ and all the other kind of stuff. The trade-off there is you're going to lose speech intelligibility. One of the things that, and this started coming into play years ago, the electronically steerable arrays, where you can get a very narrow, focused vertical beam, so that you're not hitting all the other surfaces in the auditorium itself. So the electronically steerable line arrays, it's going to be pricey. And it's going to be basically for speech only. That can be a tool in the toolbox. In fact, this is one of the ones I was looking at not too long ago. And it's like your only hope of, and this is part of it, the room is the room. The room is going to have the characteristics that the room has. So unless you actually change the physical properties of the room, nothing else is going to change. So unless you're willing to change that, and it may be undesirable to change that, you've got to work with a loudspeaker type, such as an electronically steerable array, that will basically direct the sound energy to where the humanoid life forms are. Because humans actually make very good absorbers. So if you've got people in the room, that is going to help. So this is taking that very narrow beam and steering it down to where the people are and keeping it off of all the other surfaces. That's typically how I would look at a scenario like that.
Next question.
Steve Uroff in Madison, Wisconsin's up next. What audio processors should I consider to minimize the background noise floor of a 6-person meeting room with very present HVAC sound? The room has Microsoft Teams Rooms dedicated hardware.
Yeah, typical conference room. It doesn't matter if you're dedicated Teams, dedicated Zoom, if you're Google Meet, it doesn't matter. Some of the electronic boxes are really good at eliminating the room noise.
We lost Tom there for a second. The wonders of bringing in
noise. And some of the manufacturers will actually do
for Tom for a second.
Sorry.
Start over again. Yeah, go ahead.
Some of the manufacturers are very good at eliminating the background noise that's going to the far side. And some of them, you can actually do live demos with them. So you can assess for yourself how these things sound. My big thing is you still haven't fixed it for the humans inside the room trying to communicate with one another. That's the part that I've kind of been trying to hammer home here, is fix the room for the people in the room first. Get the background noise levels down. And I know that's kind of unpopular because that takes money. But, and sometimes this is one of the frustrating things. Was just pre-pandemic, large audio manufacturer did a survey, and like 4 out of the 5 top complaints were all related to audio, that you couldn't hear people clearly and that kind of stuff. That 4 out of 5. But when somebody comes in to redo a conference room, are they more apt to spend money on that new 21:9 display, or are they more apt to spend money on fixing the audio or fixing the room? No, everybody wants the eye candy. It's, the flashy stuff. It's got blinky lights. That's what I want. And they still haven't fixed the basic need for the room, which is communication.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Mark Giuliani here on the panel. And in Washington, D.C., what can you do when dealing with noisy air diffusers in leased space?
If it's just a diffuser, okay, and I'm going to limit it to that, Things that make noise, any turbulence in airflow, anytime you have a change in speed of airflow. So if I look at the ductwork, what is the volume of the duct as compared to the volume of the open spaces in the diffuser? If the volume of the open spaces in the diffuser are smaller than the ductwork, then the air has to speed up coming through the diffuser. If that's the case, that's going to be your noise source. Again, assuming it's the diffuser at the moment. You can get a more open diffuser where the open areas of the diffuser match that of the actual volume of the ductwork. So if it is that, you could possibly, in fact, they've got noise ratings on diffusers as well. So if it's just the diffusers, if that really is truly the problem, you might be able to switch out the diffusers.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. What is an impulse response? Is that similar to what's done with SMAART, SMAART, or similar tools in a live venue?
It is. An impulse, a true impulse response is very brief in time and it's very broadband. The problem with that is you're not going to get robust signal to noise. In other words, your test signal as compared to the noise in a room. So if you have a very controlled environment, you can do a true impulse. And your software may allow you to do a true impulse. But if not, it's easy to do a sine sweep. That's going to give you from, low frequency to high frequency over a period of time. And you can get really good signal to noise ratio. In other words, the information that you're trying to gather, which is the signal, is going to be much higher than the noise floor of the room itself. So you can do a sine rather than just a true IR.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What considerations should I be aware of when it comes to room modes in a space?
Yeah, I think we've been talking about that. Number one, is it a critical listening space? That's really what it boils down to. If it's
now,
somewhere,
I think that all spaces are critical listening spaces. I go into a restaurant and I'm like, if a restaurant is got a lot of din, I'm always like, this is the last time I'm coming here. Like, like it's literally like I'll go to a restaurant once that has a lot of reflection. Do you do any work with restaurants?
Thankfully, no, because I don't think I'd find myself very popular. And some of you guys would relate to this. My ability to put up with nonsense is inversely proportional to my age. So get into these spaces.
There's little kids over there.
I resemble that remark.
Exactly.
Yes, curmudgeon here. Again, when they think it gives energy to the room. What it does is it kills conversation. It'll get people in and out faster. Okay, fine. But it really does kill conversation. I had 5 kids. If I wanted someplace noisy, I'd stay home. Sorry, joke. But that's fix the room for the people in the room.
Yeah.
I can't emphasize that enough.
Next question.
Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas. With the uses of correct deployment of acoustic blankets like these, which I have a bunch of, and he notes the Audimute Sound Absorption Sheet, Sound Dampening Blanket, Soundproofing Sheet, green screen, and he's got a link to these from Audimute.
Yeah, okay. That's not a product I'm familiar with. This is where, again, if you're going to do treatment, do adjoining walls. Again, what are you trying to do in the room? If it's just a conference room, I'm going to try and do what I can with it. I'm not trying to turn every conference room into a recording studio. That's not the purpose.
Go ahead.
I'm just trying to fight the battles that I think I have at least some chance of winning. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. What is the intent of the space, and work with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I've got nothing. This room here, I've got these wonderful diffusers in the room called bookcases, so that works in my favor. I had a room last place I was at. I had a vaulted ceiling. Hated it. I hate vaulted ceilings. They're horrid. All it does is add unnecessary volume and unnecessary reflective surface to the room. So when I see those kind of things, in fact, let me see if I've got it handy. Some of these rooms that I get into are just unbelievable, and I don't know if I've got a picture of it. This is one I was just given. Can I get to it? Anyway, you can go on to the next question. I'll see if I can find this.
Let's go to the last question.
Fair enough. Mark Giuliani in Washington, D.C. has our last one. What recommendations do you have for architects when designing conference rooms?
Hire an acoustical consultant. Actually, that would be for the building itself. You say for the architects themselves. Architects are just like the rest of us. They like to eat. And you can do a lunch and learn with AIA credits for them. And you can do an outreach to the local architects and do something like what I did, acoustical considerations for small rooms. And I'm one of my kind of taglines is you can teach people out of ignorance. You can't teach them out of stupid. And again, that architectural class that I did years ago, that was one of the most receptive audiences I've ever had. I did room mode demos. I did all sorts of fun stuff. And they had a good time because it was information that they had not heard before. So it was, it all depends on the audience. Yeah, here, I'll share this is a room I was handed. It's like, oh, shoot. This is a fellowship hall kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, oh, my goodness. And this is another one where it's like somewhere you have to tame this cavern that you've created.
Yeah.
That's your only fix. You've got to tame the cavern first.
But I'm sure it looked nice when they saw the drawings.
Well, again, if it looks pretty, you're in trouble. If it's on an architectural design award, you're in even deeper trouble.
Yeah. It's great.
So this is like, oh my, where do you start?
Yeah.
You just don't.
Tom, thank you so much for your time. We just really appreciate you coming on. What's the website for the company that you work with?
It's just simply exertisalmo.com, EXERTIS, Almo, ALMO. Elmo's a little red guy. Elmo distributes Pro AV.
Right. Very good. Well, thank you so much for the time that you spent with us. It was really, really enlightening. It was just really great conversation. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I've listened to you guys on occasion. It's been great. Kind of feel like I'm amongst the Golden Pipes Club here.
Well, it's, I just feel like this is such an important subject, and I'm really glad that you're able to come on because it's just, we need people to understand, especially people who are listening that might be working in some of these organizations, that this has become, it's getting more and more and more important as we go more and more towards hybrid. It's going to be a bigger and bigger deal because you're just not getting the full productivity. People measure the cost of the room, but they don't measure the loss of productivity. Right. When people are, when their energy is drained, even if that's the only thing that happens, you're losing more money every week in that conference room than it costs you to build it.
And if it's a room that doesn't work, they don't use the room.
Yeah.
So then it's a total waste of money.
Exactly. Thank you to the panel. We really appreciate all of you here. It was a great panel today, and we really appreciate your time and being here and answering the questions and giving back to everybody here that are watching. Thanks to the incredible technical team on the back end that makes this happen every single day, 7 days a week. We have not missed a day in over 4 years, and it's just an incredible team, village that makes this happen every single day. And thanks to the producers for all the great questions and making sure that we had something to talk about. So we really appreciate that too. Otherwise, this gets to be a really short show. We've had a couple short shows, but this is a really, really great set of questions today. Now, if we had to walk around and ask these questions, and we didn't have the Tlaloc traversal of answering these questions over Zoom, we would have traveled 96,000 miles. That's 155,000 kilometers. And that is 763 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours.
Want to use those ripe bananas because they absorb more sound.
Yeah.
Totally. But not rotten. Those are worse.
1.5 billion plantains. I think we have to add plantains to the calculation.
Plantain coefficient.
Is a plantain like half of a banana, or is it really more like
0.6? I think
3/4. Yeah, I was looking at the plantains yesterday. I think it depends. I mean, I think that the whole food plantains seem to be shorter.
That's the problem. Plantain variability.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Tom. It was really, really good.
All right, you guys through with me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much,
folks. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So great to have you on.
Take care.
So thank you so much. All right,
Thank you,
see
Tom.
later.
Thanks.